Psalm 107. I can't emphasize enough, well, I probably can, but I feel like it's worth emphasizing again that this psalm is written almost entirely in symbolic and metaphorical language. Uh, it, on one level, it is a rehearsing and retelling of Israel's history. And there are things we draw from it, from the symbols, from the metaphors that apply in our lives today, many centuries later. Just talked, here's the other thing. There is kind of this pattern where the psalmist describes the difficulty, and tragedy, and some of the difficulty and tragedy is the result of Israel's rebellion against God's commands, His design. And in each of the scenarios, they finally come to the end of themselves and they cry out to God and He rescues them. And then the idea, this is in verse 21, we've already talked about this, but let them give thanks to the Lord for His unfailing love and His wonderful deeds for mankind. And that's kind of a recurring chorus. Now in verse 23, a whole new word picture. Some went out on the sea in ships. They were merchants on the mighty waters. We got to back up a minute here, and you have to set this in history. What were the mighty waters? The Mediterranean Sea was the largest body of water that ancient Hebrews would have known about. And realize that in this era, boats, pardon me, ships were not constructed in a way to safely and consistently sail thousands of miles. These ships were pretty basic vessels, and it was hundreds of years later, as I understand history, that, and it kind of stands to reason, that ships would be made in a more consistently safe fashion. Well, anyway, okay. But for the ancient Hebrew, that the Mediterranean Sea, well, even today, if you go to Israel and you stand on the western edge of Israel and look out on the Mediterranean Sea, you can't see land on the south or the north. It's just one vast body of water, vast ocean. And for the Hebrew, it was a mysterious and dangerous place. And often the sea represented other mysteries and other dangers. Okay, some went out on the sea in ships. They were merchants on the mighty waves. There was wealth to be acquired through the shipping, and so they did. Verse 24, they saw the works of the Lord, His wonderful deeds in the deep. The ocean is a very amazing place, and it does reflect the grandeur of God's work. In verse 25, for He spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves. I've never been on the ocean when a tempest occurred. I don't think I want to be. In verse 26, here's the nature of this tempest. and the high waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. In their peril, their courage melted away. Well, yeah. I mean, I kind of think anytime something like that would happen and the captain of the vessel would say, "No problem, mates. Uh, you know, everything's fine. Everything's fine. It's going to be okay. Don't give it a thought." No. No. Uh, in verse 27, they reeled and staggered like drunkards. Well, yeah, they were at their wits' end. In other words, this is not just like, boy, we had some kind of rough seas, but it was no big deal. This, the picture here is that when you reach your wits' end, in this sense, what it meant was they had done everything they knew to do, and there was nothing left to do. They couldn't change it, and they were running out. They were not just running out; they were out of ideas on what do we do now. Have you ever been there? Sure you have. That's part of being an adult. The waves of life, your circumstances, sorrow, tragedy. And it's one thing to observe these things in others, but it's a whole different thing when we experience it in our own lives. If you've had a career, I think everybody who, connects with this has or are in a career. You know what it's like for things to get really, really wonky, where you stagger and you're at your wit's end. These things happen. You might even be in the midst of that kind of tempest right now. You're not going to be able to make the tempest stop. Now, Jesus did for the apostles on the Sea of Galilee, which is, I'm not sure. When we got to go there, I looked at it and I thought, this is a beautiful lake, but I didn't think of it as a sea. But they did, and there were at least a couple of times when the elements conspired. God permitted or caused a great storm, and the apostles, the disciples, thought they were going to die at sea. And Jesus spoke a word, and the sea became calm. Well, I suppose in a metaphorical sense, that can happen for us as well when our emotional and circumstantial seas are turbulent in a tempest. It is possible that Jesus would do the impossible and speak a word and totally calm the sea. And he does, often, but not always. Well, this is also a part of the pattern of the psalmist, where he writes that they were at their wits' end, and then in verse 28, then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. Isn't that the pattern? Until we come to the end of ourselves and we call out to the only one who can take care of this, who can solve the issues. And yet when we do finally reach the end of our wits, we call out We cry out to the Lord in our trouble. And in this word picture, God brought them out of their distress. I don't know that he instantly calmed the sea. There are times when he does that, as I've said, but there are other times where he gives us what we need to navigate through the storm. I believe how he does this is often as unique as the individuals that cry out to him, but it's all the result of his grace. The sailors in this word picture didn't deserve to be delivered. We don't either. It's God's grace that intervenes on our behalf. They cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. And then the psalmist goes on, he stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm. Oh, you think? And he guided them to their desired haven. What's the current tempest in your life today? What occupies your thoughts when there's nothing else to occupy them? That's a hint of what's your tempest. Sometimes the waves are, as in this word picture, as high as a mountain and as deep as a valley. Sometimes. And sometimes it's not that dramatic, but it still is a tempest. Well, this is not a promise. So I'm not saying, oh, God's promises, he's always going to bring you through those. No, this is a reflection on a pattern. And the pattern is when we reach the end of our wits and we cry out to God. That doesn't just mean, and we prayed. No. We cry out. And that's an emotional moment. We cry out to God, and he brings us through. And then in verse 30, they were glad when it grew calm, and he guided them to their desired haven. The guidance of God is an amazing thing, and a subject that if you start in Genesis and work all your way all the way through to the end of Revelation 22, you just get a tremendous set of times when God guided his people as groups and as individuals. And today, I am thankful that God will, it's part of the pattern of how he deals with us, that he will guide us. What are some things that keep us from hearing or getting his guidance? Well, for me, it's the noise of a few things. The noise of fear and anxiety. The what ifs. It's the noise of the voice, and I don't actually hear a voice, but there's a message that says, you're not going to make it. You're just not going to make it. And an accompanying voice that says, and the reason is because you're just not enough. Wow. You may not have that, but to me, it's nearly impossible for me to get God's guidance when the noise of those overtake my conscious thought and processing. Whatever it is, identify it. And then give God cry out to him and give him that his work in your life will do its work. Well, didn't do great with that. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.